Of course, all of this was the intent and purpose of al-Wasiyah. As the previous speaker mentioned, Hadhrat Ahmad alayhi salam received many portents of his impending death. And as any loving father would do, he tried to prepare his family. He tried to prepare us for that. And our wasiyah is a humble attempt to raise our standard, our understanding, our spiritual level, to prepare ourselves for this great shock, this great loss. At the same time, he would quote the examples of history, of the losses that took place in the lives of people and how they responded and failed to achieve that dedication that was required of them. For instance, he mentioned the case of Jesus Christ and his disciples and how they all abandoned him during the event of crucifixion. We know this. But think about that. He's giving examples of what could happen if we are not prepared. At the death of the messenger, Jesus Christ, as they understood, they all fled away. They abandoned him. That person called Peter, who he said would be the rock of my church, he himself denied him 3 times and went into hiding with all the rest of his companions. And so this was the pressure of the moment. It crushed that rock who was supposed to be Peter. And as well in the case of Moses, again, for 40 days, the Jews, they wept and they grieved and mourned the loss of Moses. But it's not just in the case of the Christians and the Jews. Even in the case of the Muslims, we know what happened upon the death of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Other than Hazrat Abu Bakr, there was complete pandemonium, grief, shock, and chaos. And one as strong as even Hazrat Omar, he was wielding a sword and brandishing it, saying to anyone who dared to claim that his master had died, that he would end his life. In fact, he would say his master was just in a swoon and would return any moment. But by God's grace, at that moment, we know that Hazrat Abu Bakr came upon the scene, and all those conditions that could have destroyed, disintegrated, and disunited that Jamaat of early Muslims, he had the solution. And he would eventually be elected as the Khalifa. In this sense, Hazrat Masih alayhi salam, he spoke very clearly about the elections of what was to come on the 27th of May. And he said in one of the final intimations in the year 1907, in December, that Satayis ko ek waqiya ho, hamare mutaliq, Allahu khairum wa abqa. That on the 27th, there will be an incident regarding ourselves, and Allah is everlasting, and He is the best. It is to this allusion of events, referring to what would happen, that thrusting of greatness upon Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin. And it was at that occasion, the 27th of May, 1908, when he was called upon the advice of his beloved master, to step up and to become the leader of this Jamaat at a time when, again, there were many upheavals and earthquakes around, within the community, and the opponents themselves, they had predicted, these were their words: nothing now is left with the Mirzais after the demise of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. The movement has lost its head, and the person who has become the head only knows the Holy Quran, and he will only be reading and lecturing on the Quran in the masjid. This was their assessment, that with the death of Hazrat Ahmad alayhi salam would be the death of the movement, and they had taken out these parades in the streets of Lahore and were carrying around dummies talking about these are the burial services of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, and mocking and insulting him in all these ways. By Allah's grace, it is under this impetus that he strengthened Maulana Nuruddin throughout his life, in his birth, his life, and finally in his service for his beloved master, to strengthen him for the occasion that would require him to set us in motion on that path which we now see after 100 years, the falseness of all those statements. The Jamaat Ahmadiyya never died with Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. As he said, Allahu khairum wa abqa, Allah is better and He is ever living. This Jamaat, by God's grace, is a solid proof that he was true, and Hazrat Maulana Nuruddin was his true friend and true supporter throughout his life. I will conclude with his own words and advice to us about Khilafat and what we must do so we can maintain this link and this spirit, and our conduct will be of the highest order. so it remains amongst us for generations to come. He says, in the words of Maulana Nuruddin, what is your duty to Allah? It is that you should adhere to true doctrines. Your conduct should conform to them, and you should be righteous. Righteousness safeguards one against suffering and bestows comfort. A righteous one is delivered from all constraints. He is loved by God and is provided for in a manner of which he has no conception. His prayers are accepted, and he has bestowed triumph over his enemies who are ruined. The gates of the knowledge of the divine are opened for a righteous one. Therefore, my first admonition is, be righteous. Be righteous. Be righteous for the sake of Allah, and be truly obedient to Allah, and may your end be in a state of obedience to Him. وَلَا تَمُوتُونَ, and let not death overtake you, إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ, except when you are in a state of full submission. This was, my dear brothers and sisters, the life and legacy of Hadhrat Maulana Nuruddin. This was the message of his life for all of us, that we can step into this spirit and become Nuruddins when we love God, love His messenger, love His book, love His ways, and let that be our life, our legacy, and our death for the next generation to come. May this be the spirit we move with into the next century of Ahmadiyyat, and may that blessing bring about a new century of blessings for Ahmadiyya Jamaat, inshallah. But we are part and parcel of this. May Allah help us and guide us and have mercy on us in all of our affairs and our efforts. Ameen. Wa akhir da'wana an alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
जिंदा वही है जो के खुदा के करीब है, मकबूल बन